Hey economics students, so today we're going to be looking at how to write an excellent A star or A economics essay every single time. Okay, and in particular we'll be looking at the A-level syllabus and how to write a 25 mark question and also how to write a strong conclusion. This is also important for the IB syllabus where the questions, the 15 markers and the evaluative questions are often very similar. So the overview of the 25 marker is it's the last question on the paper. So sometimes I will tell students to start with that question, especially the students who often have issues with time management. I often find students will spend a lot of time on the short answer questions, and then eventually when they get to the last question, the 25 marker, which is worth all of the small answer questions put together, they have no time, or they've left 5 to 10 minutes to answer this question. So starting with this question, I think, is good practice because you can rush the multiple choice questions under time conditions, but you can't rush the 25 marker. So, first point, here's some things that I've noticed as years as an examiner and teacher. The first point that I always notice is that all the questions have a cause and effect. And each point and paragraph that you make has to reflect that. And it has to focus on one cause and effect. Do not write huge paragraphs. Many students go into this exam and they get to this question and they write a stream of consciousness without disregarding all the rules of grammar. So they write, I've actually seen a 3-sided A4 paragraph. Don't fall into that trap. Make a point, one paragraph. Okay? My next advice is to make it easy for the examiner to see all of your points and your evaluation points. Some students make a point and then evaluate the point in the next paragraph, which is then slightly indented to make sure the marker can quite easily see the KAA points and the evaluation points. That's really good practice. I think the more you make the marker's job easy, the better marks you will get. Okay, my next point, which seems to contradict my first point, no huge paragraphs, a little bit, but make sure that you use a multi-leveled chain of analysis. This will make your essays much longer and more in depth. Another key pitfall for students is that their essays are too short. And nearly every single time, this is due to omitting a multi-level chain of analysis. For example, if we think about expansionary monetary policy, lowering interest rates to increase aggregate demand, some students will just write, lowering interest rates will lead to economic growth. And that's it. What you have to do is break that down by taking each stage and how it affects consumer spending, how it affects business spending, and then how it affects overall GDP or aggregate demand. Okay, so that will really fill out your paragraphs and make them more in depth and much longer. So make sure you do that. Multi-level chain of analysis, it comes up over and over again in the examiner's reports. So for this question, you need to write 2 KAA points, that's knowledge, application and analysis, and 2 evaluation points. Now that seems like not very much, but if you follow a very detailed chain of analysis, using diagrams, using examples, and using a very effective evidence, then you will get good marks. Failure to do this will lead you to a maximum of 14 out of 25. Now, you don't want that kind of score. You want to be hitting 20 or above. So another point is that the biggest difference between this and the other questions is that there's no extract for the 25 marker like the other questions. So your application comes from your knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean you have to know everything about everywhere. You've just got to apply the question to your economy. You can be hypothetical to some degree, but often the examples you've learned in class about the UK, China, Japan, the US, Europe are more than acceptable. And we'll see what that looks like in a minute when we look at some example questions. So first we'll look at the KAA points. That's knowledge, application and analysis. So we all want to get level 4, so we'll focus on some of the key concepts on level 4. That's 13 to 16 marks. So we've got demonstrates precise knowledge and understanding of the concepts, principles and models. So basically you want these to be as precise as possible. You don't want to make any errors here. You don't want to make any errors with your diagrams. You want to have them fully labelled, fully titled, and you want to be able to describe them really effectively to get level 3 and level 4. No errors. That's very important. The next point, it says analysis is relevant and focused. So your narrative must use the wording or the evidence from the question. Now, that's another key pitfall, is that some students will just see the question and then just throw out everything that they know about that topic area. What you want to do is keep it very focused to the question. Always answer the question. As always, your analysis needs to be linked in context. Don't make it generic. Each question is accompanied by some information, but not a large article, but you have to use this information. You may be asked for an industry of your choice. For microeconomics, it's very common. Or use a country of your choice for macroeconomics. And in this case, it's up to you to apply the theories that you've learned to your chosen context. Now, for students in the UK, I'm sure a lot of the teaching material that you've looked at and your teacher has given you a lot of UK examples. If you're in another country, then these will vary, but often you should use the country that you live in or you have an in-depth knowledge on in. That will really help you out. And as I said, probably most examples are China, UK, Europe, Japan, and a few other countries. So I've put these things in red because this is related to the chain of analysis and balance. So the link between cause and effect in each paragraph must be detailed using a chain of reasoning. They have to be logical and coherent and well ordered between cause and effect. Okay, this also means that the chosen structure is strong. There isn't a specific number on the chain of reasoning because different scenarios, different policies have different numbers of chains of reasoning required, but 2 chains of reasoning simply would only be good enough for level 2. You need to be working on expanding your chains of reasoning. When the answer is said to lack balance, it basically implies that one of your KAA points is more detailed than the other. So you want to have some form of balance in your paragraphs. Don't make one point very long and detailed, and the next point very short. Okay, so we'll have a look at two very popular past paper questions. So during the 25 mark question for paper 1 and paper 2, you need, as I said, your own knowledge, examples and application of the concepts, and no generic answers. So question 7 here is about the financial crisis of 2008 and the tariffs introduced after that. So the question is, evaluate the likely effects of an increase in protectionism on the economy of a developing country of your choice. Now, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is China and the American tariffs on Chinese goods. That would be a great example to use, but there are so many other examples that you can have a look at as well. I've seen a really good one about Nigeria. I saw a really good one about Mozambique as well. So definitely, it's up to you. But for me, the most obvious country to choose there would be China. Question 8. Global oil prices fell from a 2008 peak of $147 per barrel to $27 per barrel. Evaluate the likely macroeconomic consequences of a significant fall in oil prices. So this question is all about oil as a resource, okay? And for this one, what I want you to do is really look at examples of the use of oil and its impact on the economy and how that affects particularly aggregate supply. So that's going to be your diagram as well. For question 7, the tariff diagram and the ADAS diagram is going to be absolutely critical here. But for question 8, certainly the aggregate supply diagram would be very useful. So the phrases using a developing country of your choice or using a developed country of your choice. Of course, keep an eye on the wording of the question. Many students wrote about a developed country of their choice for the macro question when that came up. So don't do that. Just keep an eye. Make sure you focus on a developing country, not a developed country. That would lose you marks. And using an industry of your choice, they're very common 25 marker questions. So in the macro question, you may focus on more than one country to gain application marks. In the micro question, you must only refer to one industry to gain application marks. This seems a bit odd that you could refer to more than one country for the macro and you can only refer to one for the micro, but this is what the examiner reports states. So again, you don't need loads and loads of application because the examiners know that and you can't expect students to know everything about everything and apply it to every country in detail with lots of data. It's just an impossible task for students. But what is important is that you're showing the examiner that you know what you need in the application, as long as each paragraph is not generic and contains analysis to context, you can reach the top level. Okay, so you don't have to know GDP data, you don't have to know the exact interest rates or the exchange rates or something like that, but what you do need to know is to know the general trends. So if it's evaluate austerity, for example, you can use the UK and how that affected the UK economy, but you don't need too much data and details. Okay. So your evaluation points here, this is the important bit. So you've got a total of 9 marks. So basically what you want is different viewpoints. And so just like the KA points, the evaluation points require a detailed chain of reasoning to develop your ideas. If chains of reasonings are only partially developed, then this would only be a level 2 type of answer. Evaluation points also need to be within the context, so you can't just have a bunch of memorized superficial sentences, as that would only get you a level 1 mark. And then finally, this is an important bit, the phrasing informed judgments to be made only appears on the 25 markers. This implies that the 25 mark questions are the only answers that require a detailed conclusion. So your conclusion must never summarize your points. It must reflect on the question and answer the question and weigh up the points that you have written to make a judgment. Now, a key phrase here is "it depends." So you could utilize the "it depends" strategy and ultimately finish your answer by making a very clear overall judgment. Candidates cannot achieve level 3 for evaluation without a valid conclusion that makes a judgment. Okay. So with that first point again, your evaluation, don't just say an indirect tax is regressive for those on lower incomes. Really break it down. Like, why is it regressive for people on lower incomes? Use ideas in elasticity, income elasticity of demand, elasticity of demand, and I really go into detail on the analysis on how indirect tax would hurt lower incomes more. So when evaluating this, you've got to think to yourself, is this true all of the time for everybody and in all situations? If not, then this limitation is an opportunity to evaluate. So how, when, why does your point unravel? Critique some of the assumptions that they've used to underpin your KAA analysis and explain why your analysis is less valid if the underlying assumptions don't hold. Consider the issue from different perspectives, different political perspectives. Why might the impact of a policy be different on groups such as the rich and the poor, the old or the young, the developed and the developing economics? And finally, use evidence to either support the argument or to provide a counter argument. So Spatula is a good way of using. There's lots and lots of mnemonic devices for evaluation. Spatula is one of them. Taco is another. Pasta is another. They're all roughly similar, but this is a good way to structure your answer or come up with really good evaluative points as you're writing the essay. So Spatula, think about some of these. They're not always going to be relevant, but I would say most of the time you can evaluate a policy using this formula. So first one, scale. What is the magnitude of the issue? How important is the issue to the economy overall or to the industry overall? The next one, prioritize. This is in the mark scheme again. Which of your points is the most important? You can structure your essay around the importance of your points, and in the conclusion you can bring this out again. Which is the most important evaluation point? So prioritize which point is better or most important. Compare this with alternative points that you've written about. Is this always true in every scenario, in every economy, in every industry? In what situations would your point about the policy or issue not be true? The next one is really, really important because it comes up again and again, is time. Will your point be changed, or will the policy be more effective in the long run or in the short run? When does the policy have an effect? How many years? How many months? Okay. And the next one is the unintended consequences. Does your point create problems elsewhere? Are there externalities to your point? Does it affect a third party? That's a really key microeconomic question about market failure. So really think about what are the unintended consequences of the policy or of the issue. Next one, what are the limitations of your point? Is the data reliable? That's a kind of calculations issue. Also, how effective is the policy in terms of how much money is being invested? Is it too much or is it too little? That's another key point to this. And finally, who are the achievers and who are the losers? How are all the different groups impacted? So an indirect tax on alcohol, for example, is going to hit lower income groups harder because alcohol and the tax on alcohol will be a much larger proportion of their income than higher income groups. Equally about policies in the UK, if it's about building a new waterway or a new railway system, where is the railway? Does it affect different groups more or less economically? So that's another thing to think about here. So again, a really good method and a really good phrase to use is "it depends." So what does the success and impact of the point or the policy depend on? So of course, keep using that phrase, "it depends." So conclusions, again, students are often quite weak at coming to a conclusion. It's quite a difficult skill to master, especially when you're running out of time in a 2-hour exam. So, as well as evaluation points throughout your answer, candidates must also need to make a valid judgment or conclusion to be eligible for a level 3 evaluation. No matter how good the evaluation points are, if there's no conclusion, the maximum evaluation mark you can get is 6 out of 9. Do not just summarise what you've said in the main part of your answer. That's a complete waste of time, and the level 3 evaluation cannot be achieved. You may achieve 1 mark, but you'll not be able to get those higher marks and get an A star. So you've got to be able to write a really good conclusion. So given the factors which have just been analysed and evaluated, the role of the conclusion is to make a judgment. So you've got to definitively answer the question. So use the wording from the question. Go back to the question. Make sure you answer it. And a strong way to weigh up these answers and weigh up these arguments is, again, to use the "it depends" argument. So today, I've got a little activity for you now that I'd like you to do. So let's have a look at this question. This 25 marker. Tobacco is the single biggest cause of cancer in the world. A tax increase that raises tobacco prices by 10% decreases tobacco consumption by 4% in high income countries and 5% in low and middle income countries. Little research has been done about the long-term health effects of e-cigarettes. The illegal tobacco market still counts for 1 in every 10 cigarettes consumed globally. So there you've got lots and lots of information about the tobacco market. Lots of arguments are already been given for you here. So you should be thinking now, like, all of the evaluation points that you can make about tobacco. So evaluate the impact of government intervention in the cigarette market. So pause it there. What I want you to do now is come up with a really, really quick plan for this answer. Spend 5 minutes just writing out a really quick plan, and then we'll look at an example answer. So a plan I would always use is definitions, explanations, diagrams, and evaluation. Now this question is about market failure, so make sure your answer focuses on market failures, demerit goods, negative externalities, and Pigovian tax. Okay, so pause it there and write a plan. Okay, so let's have a wee look at this. Here's an answer that a student previously wrote. So what I want to do now is have a quick read through, and I'd like you to write some comments that you have on this first part of the answer. Okay, pause it there and write some comments. So, with this question, we'll have a look at the first paragraph. So the first paragraph is about government intervention, and they've mentioned market failure, and they've mentioned an ad valorem tax. You can also use it a Pigovian tax there. It's fairly good first paragraph. But if we look further down here, the diagram choice, you'll notice, if you picked up on that, is not a strong choice. And it doesn't really answer the question, because you'll notice that even though they say in their essay they talk about the consumption of cigarettes, that diagram is about a production externality, right? And that's why I think they have struggled with explaining the diagram. So all things considered, this paragraph would be a level 3. It's still quite a good paragraph. It's a good paragraph, but because the diagram is incorrect, they're not going to get a level 4 type of mark. I would also like you to label the diagrams a bit better. Make sure you've got a decent title there, and you write price of cigarettes, quantity of cigarettes. Okay, so our next paragraph, have a look at that. See if you can pick out any of the key points. Okay. So basically there's nothing wrong with this paragraph, and it links nicely to the previous points that the writer wrote. The application is evident with reference to e-cigarettes, and the theory is fairly sound. There's some understanding of externalities, but technically marginal private benefit would fall if demand is reduced. And I think that might be just a confusion for the student in terms of their diagram. I think that's the core point here. There is an opportunity here for extra chains of reasoning. You could talk about the cross-price elasticity of demand here, which would be quite good with e-cigarettes. The biggest issue really is that there could be a link to a diagram here. It would be best you could draw a subsidy diagram and gain extra chains of reasoning. Additionally, you could also draw what is being analysed at the end of this point on the externality diagram. So really the key point here with this answer is it's fairly strong. The student obviously knows what they're talking about and has some good knowledge of theory. It's just they've made some critical errors with the diagram, and that has brought their marks down. Okay, so it's got more than 2 chains of reasoning, which is good. So it must be a fairly low level 3 mark. So the overall mark for KAA is fairly subjective. It's not an exact science for examiners, so it can be quite difficult sometimes for answers to fit the marking descriptors, but we want to find as many marks as possible. So we're always marking this kind of holistically. So this answer for just the KAA marks, which was what we were looking at there, would be about 10 out of 16. And it really would have been improved with a better diagram initially and a better explanation of the diagram. They didn't even describe the changes in the X and Y axis, and I think that's because the student themselves were not really sure of the diagram. Okay, so there's other evaluation points that we could go into here, some key evaluation points. So it's quite different for taxation. It's very difficult to measure Q star, the socially optimal level, and apply a monetary value to that and to judge the correct amount of taxation. So this is a calculation issue. How much is the most effective tax on cigarettes? What is the most ideal level of tax? Very difficult to judge because every single country in the world has different levels of taxation on tobacco. You could also have the Laffer curve in there, which is what I'll look at in a second. We could talk about the impact of regressive taxes on income inequality. You could talk about YED and income elasticity of demand. Is it an inferior good? It's a luxury good. Taxes may also be less effective in higher income countries. The reason for that is tobacco would be a lower portion of your income than in poorer countries. They also mentioned, I think, in the little extract that 1 in 10 cigarettes are bought in the black market. So if you increase taxes, you may increase the black market for cigarettes. And that's related to taxation abroad. So especially in Europe, if Europe's got much lower taxes on tobacco than the UK, there's a bigger incentive for UK citizens to go to Europe and then bring back lots of cigarettes and sell them on the black market. Subsidies on e-cigarettes, which used to be a thing, I don't think it is anymore, but firms may become reliant on subsidies. Again, consider the strength of the substitute. Is e-cigarettes strong, positively correlated cross-price elasticity with normal tobacco? If PED, price elasticity of demand, is inelastic, would it require a huge subsidy to make any difference to the market? And with subsidies, there's always going to be an opportunity cost for government. Should they be spending money here or should they be using the money elsewhere? So for our evaluation activities, I would like you to mark and give a level for these two evaluation points. Okay, so pause the video there and mark this paragraph. Okay, so this is quite good. It makes a good evaluation point, but I think they've made a mistake with their calculation on PED, but nevertheless, this is a good answer. There is also an opportunity here to go further with your chain of analysis and explain that cigarettes are addictive. So this would get a level 3, lower level 3 type of mark. Okay, but fairly good, fairly solid answer. So here's point 2. Okay, so with this one, this is a good question. It's a good answer about black markets, and about the unintended consequences of the tax. So a really good paragraph here. But you could also use, there's other options here that you could use. And again, this is probably a high-ish level 3 type of answer, but quite a good paragraph. I think it covers everything. But you could use a diagram to back this up. So with the Laffer curve, how we can use this is often used for income tax, but we can also use it for indirect taxes as well. So if you want to use the Laffer curve as this extra analysis on taxes, it's really good practice. So for this, if we increase the taxes, the tax rate from T1 to T2, then the government revenue received increases by quite a lot. Okay, now if we increase it to T3, this may be the optimal level of tax on cigarettes, because you gain the most revenue, the government gains the most revenue from this level of tax. But after the tax reaches a certain point, the amount of tax raised will start to decrease, and that's because the demand for that product, for tobacco, will decrease. Now, I'm not sure what the optimal level of tax is on cigarettes, but I imagine if you started going to £20, £30, £50, then people would stop smoking tobacco entirely. Whereas if it's at £1 or 50p, then it will have less of an effect on overall demand. Okay, so a Laffer curve, really useful one to use in your questions about any form of tax. So here's a little conclusion activity. I would like you to mark and comment on the conclusion shown here. Provide an overall level for evaluation, and then I would like you to write your own conclusion for this answer. Okay, so they've used the key phrase, it depends on. Okay, but they've done the very common thing which students do is summarise the main points. So it's not entirely effective. The second half of this conclusion is quite good because it uses the it depends rule, and it makes the entire focus of the evaluation on taxation. You could have beefed this out by comparing it with the second method of subsidies as well. So overall, again, this is about a level 3 answer, but it's not eligible for level 4 or the top levels of level 4. So overall, this would probably get about a 7 out of 9 because both the first, second evaluation points are a low level 3 and the conclusion is also a level 3. So fairly strong, robust answer, but could be certainly improved on. So here's a really strong example for this question. So in conclusion, the intervention that is likely to have the biggest impact on the cigarette market is taxation. So they prioritize their arguments. This is due to having a direct financial impact on the consumer, backed it up. However, it depends on the findings of research into the health effects of e-cigarettes. In the long run, if e-cigarettes are found to be healthy, then subsidies to encourage this substitute would be more impactful. Okay, that's a great example of a conclusion. Okay, so I've got one more question for you, which is about Hinkley Point and electricity. With this question, again, I would like you to maybe plan this out or write it. Even evaluate the likely private costs and external costs involved in such major power station construction projects. Use an appropriate externalities diagram in your answer. So pause it there and think about that question and make a quick 5-minute plan. Okay, so I've made a quick plan here. So I've put definitions that you could include, explanation of what private and external costs are, draw a diagram for the negative externalities of production. Of course, you've got to explain the diagram, explain the axis, explain the change in quantity, explain the change in price. And then I've written a whole bunch of private costs that I just came up with. And then I've written some external costs there too. And of course, in the end, we'll have to make a conclusion based on the question. So I've put on an example answer. So pause it there, have a quick read of this plan. Of course, it's missing a detailed chain of analysis, but you can do that while you're writing the essay. So let's have a look at an exemplar. Okay, so have a look at that and maybe give it a quick mark. Okay, so we'll have a look at the next part of the essay. Okay, so now I want you to think about, what is this missing? What is this answer missing? It's quite good. Okay, so once you've read that, think about it. What kind of mark would it get? It's fairly strong. You've got a decent diagram. You've got some decent points. You've got some decent evaluation points. But what's it missing? The big thing it is missing is private costs. Okay, so they've went into a huge amount of detail on the external costs, but I don't think they even mentioned the private costs of building Hinkley Point. And that, again, by not reading the question and not answering the question properly, means that you're not going to be able to achieve a level 4 answer. Now that answer was quite good, quite detailed, good examples, good diagram, but if you don't read the question properly, then you can't get full marks. Okay, well, that's enough from me. So what I'd like you to do now is maybe try some of those questions, write up some of the answers, and really try to hit level 4 each and every time. Remember to read the question carefully, remember to answer the questions, and make a really good conclusion for every question you answer. Okay, thank you very much.